Welcome to r/slash malicious compliance, where OP gets a speeding ticket from a cop and then ruins that cop's day. Our next Reddit post is from Boston Pilot. Years ago, I got a speeding ticket in Worcester, Massachusetts. It was a typical speed trap where they sit at the bottom of a steep hill knowing that lots of people will exceed the very low speed limit because, gravity. It was BS, so I decided to fight it and at least make them work for their $100 fine. I read everything I could find on fighting radar tickets, and one strategy was to check whether the police department had proper FCC documents on the radar they used. If they don't, the radar info is inadmissible, and you'll probably win your case. I went to the Worcester police station and found the records department down in the basement. I showed them my ticket, and I explained that I wanted to view the paperwork for the radar that I used to record my speed. I had to wait a couple of minutes, but some official came out and sternly informed me that civilians don't have access to that information. Cue malicious compliance. I asked a few people how you request records for a court case, and it turns out that, at least in Massachusetts, that's one of the things the sheriff's office does. So I went to them, paid them $50, I know, on a $100 ticket, but I've always enjoyed tilting at windmills, and I described the documents that I required. I have to admit that by the time I had to go to court, I'd kind of forgotten about the sheriff's department, but I did notice this police officer sitting in the audience section with all the other people fighting tickets. This guy was not your typical police officer though. He was wearing a very fancy uniform, and his hat had all kinds of gold braids on it, and he did not look happy. Traffic court being traffic court, it was all kinds of disorganized, with a bunch of citizens sitting around waiting for things to start. And, of course, the proceedings plod along at a snail's pace. Finally, my name is called after about 30 minutes, and this police officer comes over to me and explains that he's in charge of the entire record division for the Worcester Police. He also said that he was something like a captain or a lieutenant, I forget which. And he has the radar records in his hand for me to examine. So I look his documents over, and everything seems to be in order, so I thank him. He's visibly angry about having to spend his morning sitting in traffic court over a $100 citation. It was totally worth the $50. To this day, I don't know whether someone at the sheriff's department was just messing with the police department by naming the top guy in the records request, but I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. Don't want to let the citizens see your records? Fine. I would have loved to have been there when the sheriff's department showed up to serve the head guy with a court order. Oh, and by the way, I lost the case. OP, I think that's what you call a Pyrrhic victory. You may have lost the court case, but you made the boss of the cop who gave you the ticket suffer, and that made it well worth it. Our next Reddit post is from GMindD. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and I started my first job after college 3.5 years ago. I was hired with a group of 25 people. I used to run a lot of clubs in college, and I had this, I need to finish my job as best as I possibly can attitude when I first joined. I was good at what I did, and I put in considerably more work than other people who joined with me. Another huge motivation behind this was that since my initial pay wasn't good enough, I wanted to impress with my work and get a really good raise at the end of the year. So throughout the year, I kept working late hours, often staying for over 10 hours in a day. The way our work dynamic was set up was I was only under my manager and we were both supposed to share the work on the projects. And slowly and steadily, my manager started noticing that I was taking on extra stuff, and he started offloading his work onto me too. Now, I was essentially doing my own job and half of my manager's job as well. And I reduced the time it took to do those jobs by about 40%. I was stressed and overworked, but I was getting exceptional weekly ratings, so I felt like it was worth it. How naive I was. Yearly review time came, and I went to my one-on-one with my manager. My manager told me that while I have one of the best performance ratings in the company, they're not allowed to give new people a huge raise. And so I received the same raise as others who joined at my time, but who were doing the bare minimum. I was pissed. I told my manager that since the company has declared me average, that he should expect average performance from now on. He laughed at me, thinking I was kidding. I wasn't. Starting the next day, every task I had that I would normally finish in 2 hours now needed 8 hours. I would not stay in the office for more than the agreed upon 8.5 hours. I wouldn't finish up my lunch quickly to get more work done. I would no longer do any of my manager's job for him. Oh, the client is asking for a document that I normally take 1 hour to prepare? Sorry, an average person takes 4 hours to do this job, so I'm going to keep this document with me for the next 3 hours while I figure out how to update the table of contents. It takes 3 clicks, by the way. Oh, is there something you need after work hours? Sorry, but it'll have to wait until tomorrow. Complaints started coming in quickly about the delays in deliverables. My manager started spending a lot of his time frustrated because he wasn't very good to begin with, and now I wasn't taking up his workload. I spent that entire year working 2 hours a day while I spent the rest of the time listening to music, browsing Reddit, and watching my manager struggle. I left that job at the end of the year for a job that paid 3 times the salary. Some details of our projects get published online, and last I checked, my manager was running 7 to 8 months behind on some of the projects. And from what I heard from some of my friends in the company, my manager didn't get a raise last year. Our next Reddit post is from Kilted Turtle. This story is from the 80s. I was the East Coast expert on the network gear for a big mainframe company. I was associated with a manufacturing plant, but I did customer site visits to help field engineering either install or fix installations that weren't working. Whenever we went to a customer site, we had to wear a suit and tie. Since I often worked in computer rooms, I never wore white shirts because of the dirt issue. Normally, I would just wear a button-down shirt of a different color, like blue or pale green. So I flew to Boston to work with a sales rep to configure a system that we were trying to sell to a big bank. The sales rep says there's a minor change. First, we have to go to a mandatory sales rep meeting headed by the regional VP of sales. Fine. I get there, and there's a sea of white shirts and ties, and then me in my colored button-down shirt. I sit in the 5th row. The room has about 50 sales reps. The regional VP gets on stage, doing his best "excite the troops to go out and sell millions" speech. The audience claps and cheers. Mid-sentence, the VP sees me and stops. "Hey you, where's your white shirts?" I look around and figure out that he might be talking to me, so I point to myself. "Yeah, you in the blue shirt. All of my staff, everyone that works for me wears a white shirt." "Okay, good to know. Thanks." "Thanks? Get out and do not come back until you're wearing a white shirt." "You want me to go and not come back unless I'm wearing a white shirt?" "Yes, get out now." So I get up, walk to the aisle, turn and say, "Hey, do you know who I am?" "No, I don't effing know who you are, and I don't effing care. Out." Super. Then for the rest of you, I'm OP, the East Coast expert in networking product, and I work for the director of engineering there. So I don't work for that guy, and it's unlikely that I'll be back since I don't own a white shirt. I left and flew back home to frantic voicemails from the sales rep about his customer. The next day, I dropped by the director of engineering's office to give a trip report. He says, "So, OP, you were a big hit at the sales meeting. The VP of sales called to apologize, and he wants you to come back." Nope, not gonna happen. He comes here wearing a colored shirt and apologizes to me, and I'll consider it. He is not going to do that. Fine, then I'm just not traveling to that region. I'll talk to people on the phone. I could do my job that way just fine. And I walked out. I called the sales rep and said we'd work over the phone, but I was not coming back. He wasn't happy, but he understood. A week later, the receptionist calls me, and I have a guest. I go to the lobby, and there's my director and the regional VP of sales wearing a blue shirt. Best apology ever. So back in the 80s, network stuff was crazy expensive. The networking part of the deal was worth $1 million, tying customers into existing mainframes, and along with the new mainframes they ordered, it would be $4 to $5 million altogether. And it was not going to fly without some help. So all those commissions for the sales rep, the manager, the upper manager, and the VP of sales were all in question. So there was a ton of money on the table for them. They got the deal, and I got a surprise bonus, but I still had to fly to Boston. Man, you'd think that people in sales would have a much better understanding of the importance of being nice to people because relationships matter, but I guess at the same time this was in the 80s, so the guy was probably just coked out of his mind. Our next Reddit post is from Mother of Crim. During halftime at our local high school football game, we went to the concession stand to get some food. Now, I didn't think that it would be an issue because we were sitting with a group of people, but I laid out my stuff on the bleachers anyway. However, when we got back, we were met with a group of middle-aged people and a rather elderly lady sitting in our spot with my stuff tossed to the side. Now, usually, I'm an extremely nice person to the point that people are always yelling at me for being too nice and getting taken advantage of. But this time, I'd had enough. I stood there for a moment and said, this is our seat. You took our seat and that's extremely rude. The leader of the middle-aged ladies, we'll call her Karen, snapped back. They said no one was sitting here, so sorry. But then she made absolutely no attempt to move, to which my husband said, yeah, you really look sorry. Karen motioned behind her and said, there's room back there. However, there was only one small section of bleacher directly behind her and between our entire group. I thought about it for a second, and I realized that arguing wasn't going to get us anywhere, and it would just make me look bad. So I smiled at my husband and said, okay, let's squeeze in here. It was like my husband could read my mind in that second and knew exactly what was going to happen. So my husband and I, along with our 4 kids, squeezed right behind Karen. As anyone who's ever had kids or has even seen kids, you can probably see where this went. These kids were running on pure sugar, adrenaline, and school spirit after a long first week of school. Also, I made sure that my youngest kid, a 6-year-old boy, sat directly behind Karen. Did I mention that the reason we were sitting up front is because kids can't sit still? Our kids like getting as close as possible to see the game, but also enjoy coming back to us to sit and talk for a bit. In any other situation, I would have made sure my kids were respectful and courteous of those around us. I would have put a stop to the screaming when our team scored, the jumping up and down to chant with the cheerleaders, and running between us and the fence, but not this night. I think it took Karen all of 5 minutes to realize her mistake. The cringing from the screams right behind her, the leaning from side to side when they were standing at the fence blocking her view, and my 6-year-old happily swinging his feet back and forth, oblivious to the fact that he was repeatedly kicking the back of Karen's seat. Karen was getting audibly and visibly annoyed from all this, and kept giving me dirty looks that said, "Control your children." But I would just shrug and then look at my husband and say, I tried to tell her. One by one, every person in Karen's group got up to leave. Karen held on the longest, and still only made it about half an hour before she decided she couldn't take it anymore and left. Maybe next time, Karen will think twice before stealing seats from kids. Our next Reddit post is from McConnell. I worked for a prestigious mill. We made cabinets, custom moldings, etc. We made very, very high-end products, and we worked with companies on tight schedules. I was the only truck driver. The company was owned by a husband and wife, and the wife did not like me. They had implemented mandatory lunches for everyone in the shop and building. But due to the uniqueness of my position, I usually didn't have to adhere to stupid rules like that. I knew that rule was just a way for them to screw over their workers because a lot of guys were dedicated and they would work through their lunch break. The wife finally caught up to me one day and was reviewing my time card and angrily said, "I don't care, you don't have any excuse, you must take a lunch break." I argued the point, saying that some of the materials I was picking up were critical, but she said that she didn't care. I think now is when I entered the malicious compliance part of this story. So I drove off to pick up the zebra wood they needed by noon. And after the lumber was loaded up, I pulled into Burger King and ignored any phone calls that my manager sent and got back to the shop 2 hours later. He was livid because he had 3 very expensive workers just waiting around for me to show up. Needless to say, I never had to take a lunch again. That was r/maliciouscompliance, and if you like this content, check out my Patreon where I publish extra episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.